Yo, what up, everyone? It's Paul. Welcome to the Portal Room. Co-hosting tonight, we got my boy Christian. Yo, yo. And tonight, we got a good one. We got another Paul. The multiverse is emerging tonight. This is going to be a good one. We got experiencer, writer, researcher, artist, all around just nice, sweet dude. Tonight we welcome Paul Vidal.
Hey
Hey,
guys,
what's going on, Paul? How's it going tonight, man?
it's going pretty good. Thanks for having me. I haven't. I'm glad to be here. I haven't done a podcast in a while, so looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm super looking forward to it as well. I've heard your story in pieces, to be honest, over time. I believe in the last 2 years and whatnot. So it's going to be fun to get into this with you. Christian, do you have any opening words for Paul?
Just glad to be here with you, brother. I'm glad that we finally got you on. I'm excited to hear your story, so I'm ready to get into it. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you. Should I be making a habit of muting and unmuting, or
Yeah, sure. I
or
mean,
basically?
more than welcome to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So let's start from the beginning, as far back as you want to go. Give us your backstory, how you got involved or interested in the topic, and I guess we'll start there with even if you want to get into some of the experiences, we can do that. And yeah, let's start from the beginning.
Sounds good. So as far as my backstory goes, you mean just regarding like how I became interested in the topic and things like that?
Yeah. Yeah, how you
Well,
got interested, and then you can kind of nudge that into some of your own personal experiences. That'd be
cool.
great.
So I pretty much been interested in the whole like UFO topic or paranormal phenomena for my entire life, like as long as I can remember. I don't know why. I uh, I always tell people I like literally taught myself to read through these UFO books that I would take out of the library in my elementary school, or it was certainly like the earliest books that I ever took out at the very least. And I think some of them were those old that old Time Life series, possibly. And it wasn't just UFOs; it was Bigfoot, it was ghosts, it was cryptids like the New Jersey Devil that used to get talked about a lot here in New Jersey. And yeah, so it stayed a big interest of mine to the point where I remember being like 9 or 10 years old, and I first learned about the word cryptozoology. And so when my family would ask me, "Oh, what do you want to be when you grow up, Paul?" I'd be like, "I want to be a cryptozoologist." And they must have just thought I was completely crazy or
It's a good
something.
answer.
It's a badass answer, excuse me. But so it was a real kind of staple of my childhood. And I at some point though I ended up kind of lapsing in terms of my interest. I think probably around age 12, 13 maybe. I didn't become completely disinterested, but up until that point I'd been like obsessively watching unsolved mysteries and sightings and reading all of these books. And then I guess I sort of bought into this material reductionist society that we live in most of the Western world. Not so much consciously, but subconsciously bought into that. So it wasn't really until my mid 20s that some things changed and I became genuinely interested in the topic like I am these days.
Do you know, well, what is it exactly that changed for you specifically? Was it just kind of the media consumption, kind of maybe the 2017 rollout, or did that have to do with some of your personal experiences? What was that specifically?
It was definitely a combination of those things. So I'll lay it out like this. throughout my childhood, I don't recall having any paranormal experiences to speak of. With that said, we always like to kind of joke around in my family that we lived in a haunted house. There actually was a murderer that lived in our house prior to us buying it at that
Wow.
time, and I was really afraid of the basement. And in my sister's bedroom, there was this tiny little crawl space that seemed to serve no real purpose. It was really bizarre. It was hidden behind or beneath a bookshelf that she had. We later put a little TV on, and there was just this tiny, like 3 foot door. Hello to my cat. There was this tiny,
So
like three
creepy
foot
that.
door, if that, beneath this little bookshelf, like wall bookshelf, and it led into this, I don't know, 8 by 8, maybe 4.5 foot tall crawl space that you certainly couldn't stand up in. You had to be hunched over, and we had all sorts of stories that this murderer had hidden out in that crawl space. I don't know if any of that was true, but this crawl space existed, and some creepy things would definitely happen. Like when my sister and I would be staying up late in that room, the TV would just turn off by itself. We would hear weird noises and stuff. So, you know, it, nothing crazy, but it was on our minds. And then the only experience that I really recall, other than a lot of very memorable alien dreams that I wonder about to this day, the main thing that sticks out for me was this experience with a shadow being, as people call them. Some refer to this type as the Hat Man, where it's basically like a very tall, shadowy entity with a somewhat wide-brimmed hat, and for whatever reason, it's almost ubiquitous across a variety of experiencers. And so, getting over to how I became interested in the topic again, it was a combination of things that happened very quickly in a short time span, as is often the case. So, as a kid, I remember encountering this Hat Man. It always stuck out in my mind as one of my earliest memories when I was around 5 years old. And then fast forward to 2016, 2017, I started researching this stuff more and had begun having some more experiences, things like you might call sleep paralysis, which I think is a very loaded term and is a whole topic of discussion itself. But I had several sleep paralysis experiences in 2016 and 2017, and pretty much wrote them off because I was mostly operating in that same reductionist paradigm. So I wrote it off as nothing crazy. And then the 2017 New York Times article came out, and that really reignited my interest in all of these topics. It was like some kind of flip was switched, and I just started like just diving into the deep end of these topics, and among other things, came across hundreds of testimonies of people who encountered this Hat Man. And I even brought it up to my father at one point. He was like, holy crap, I also had a Hat Man experience when I was like 5 years old back in the 1960s. So
Oh,
that
wow.
was very interesting.
Yeah, Paul, I want to ask you about that actually, because I know, like, I've heard a lot of people encounter this specific type of entity, and it seems like it's like earlier in childhood. I actually have seen this as well. When I was younger also. Was this around like any sort of traumatic events that you can remember as a child that this entity like appeared?
Yes, but it's kind of hard to pin it down just because I was so young and I had kind of a traumatic childhood in general. So I can't recall any specific event that took place around then, but I've, I've learned more in my adult years about what was going on when I was a kid, and there was definitely some severe trauma around that time.
Yeah, that's interesting because that's what I've kind of deduced around, the Hat Man. That's kind of what is, surrounds that as very heavy trauma based, like childhood things, is when that specific entity appears, which I find, it's an unsettling type of experience. My experience with it was unsettling as well. I don't think I slept at all the night that happened. I kept my eyes fixed on the corner the entire time to make sure that, nothing was moving. It was pretty scary. So I get that. So you got to 2017 and, it was kind of like the lull, right? It's like the in-between period. You buried yourself in the real world, and, we get David Grush. We get the light switch is flipped and everything kind of like comes at you. So what happens next? Where do you go from there? Like, let's get into that a bit.
Yeah, sure. I'll just say first that I also find the trauma link to be very interesting when it comes to this subject in general, and it's a constant kind of fixation of mine, trying to imagine what the other side of that looks like, sort of speculating, just purely speculating onto why these things seem to happen at certain times, and the various stressors and traumas that might coincide with them. I really think that's an important topic of discussion. But so that leads perfectly into where the switch was really flipped for me. So, the New York Times article came out. Leslie Kane, Ralph Blumenthal, and Helene Cooper wrote this article with these, top Navy pilots describing the Tic Tac incident that I'm sure everybody listening knows about. And things started to click into place. I had been paying attention to the topic kind of casually over the years. And again, I was like, okay, I think there's something to this. And so what ended up happening was the article came out late December 2017. I read it a few days later, start going on Reddit, places like that, researching the subject, thinking more about it just for a few weeks. And then maybe, I guess, 5-6 weeks later, I am in the middle of a college film class that I was taking at the time. And I, for the first time probably ever, just randomly asked somebody about the UFO topic. I was doing some kind of project with this woman in my class, and I was like, hey, did you happen to hear about this New York Times article that came out about the UFOs? There was nothing that spurred it. I was just very interested, and so thought I would ask a random person. And lo and behold, what happened was she said, no, I hadn't heard about this, but speaking of UFOs, I think that I might have possibly been abducted at some point some years back. And she proceeded to tell me this story of essentially your classic tale of missing time surrounding a bright orange orb that she and her friend had witnessed when they were teenagers, coming off of the ocean somewhere here on the East Coast. They essentially saw this orb coming pretty close to them off of the horizon, and then instantaneously it seemed like it was very far away again and just drifted away. And then a little later they realized that they had almost 2 hours of missing time. So I had just barely been breaking the surface of this topic, and I was like, holy shit, the first person that I bring this up to tells me that they're an experiencer, basically. And I was really dumbfounded, and we've stayed in touch
Uncanny.
since about this. Yeah, it was almost like there was a little more to that story, but it was like we were magnetized to each other for some reason. Nothing romantic, totally platonic friendship, but it was very uncanny for sure. So I'll just finish the story. So, New York Times article comes out. I start researching a little bit, not that much. Hear my first experiencer story right out the gate. And then about 2 weeks tops after that, I have what to this day remains possibly the most strange and transformative experience that I've had ever since. And I guess I can go into that if you want.
So this, so just to clarify, you're saying that this was 2 weeks after you had that conversation?
Yeah, which is crazy. It makes me think that it was
Crazy.
a hitchhiker effect or something like
Yeah.
that.
Wow, that is so interesting. Okay, so yeah, start from the beginning of that experience. Maybe, I don't know how much you remember prior to the actual experience during the day. Was there anything in particular that you were doing prior to the experience or anything that you can remember?
Oh yes, I have racked my brain, and I remember that day very well. And it was just a completely normal day. I had just gone to school, gone to college that day. I was 26 at the time, but I was working my way through college, so I was a little bit, I guess later than most people at college. And I had just gone to school that day, normal stuff. Got home, hung out with a neighbor for a little bit. I I hadn't been drinking. I hadn't even been smoking cannabis or anything like that. I had not taken any psychoactive substances whatsoever. There was nothing remarkable that really stood out. The one thing that I always recall was that I had gotten these CBD vitamins that were pure CBD that had zero THC in them. And I had taken one of those that night, and it had zero effect on me. I don't think it had anything to do with anything. It's just the only thing that I had taken that day, and that was really it. It was a completely normal day. So what happened was, I took this CBD vitamin, I guess, hoping I'd have like a good sleep. I had some chronic pain around that time, a lot of chronic pain. It was I think my first time taking CBD, maybe, and was looking for some relief. But it's just one little like vitamin D sized CBD capsule. Definitely had nothing to do with what happened, but I took it, and so I don't actually remember going to sleep. What happened was I am going about my night. At that time, I had a habit of staying up really late when I could, if I didn't have to go to work or go to school super early the next day. And so I was just like staying up late. I had this armchair in my bedroom at the time. I was living at my mom's place at this period. And I was just in my bedroom. I was sitting in this armchair. I had my laptop sort of propped up on an ottoman in front of me, like I always did. And then again, I don't remember going to sleep. I just remember waking up or coming to in my armchair, and everything seemed basically normal. All the lights were on in the house. All the lights were on in my room. My door was like partially ajar, so I could see into the hallway, and I could just tell that all the lights were on. And I was like, okay, I must have dozed off, I guess. And so I'm. This all happens very quickly, but I come to. I'm like, oh, I must have dozed off, and then I notice that I can hear some noises coming from the kitchen, and sort of like this kitchenette that we have is like close to the front door of the home. And so I'm like, what is that? Is that my mother in the kitchen? But I quickly realized that it definitely was not her. It sounded essentially like two people muttering to each other very quietly, and possibly like puttering around in the kitchen, like maybe opening drawers or cabinets or something. I really can't say exactly what it sounded like, but it was very clear that there was like somebody in that kitchen front door area. And then meanwhile, I could tell just by, looking to my left at the window that it was the middle of the night. It must have been like 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning or something. I can't say for sure, but it was completely dark out. And this was early February of 2018. And so I'm like, what the heck is going on? what are these sounds? Who's in the house? And right as soon as I have those thoughts, all of a sudden I start to get this really creepy feeling that whoever is in the kitchen has taken notice of me, and that now they're moving towards my bedroom door, which again was partially ajar, so I could see into the hallway. At this moment, I'm not paralyzed. This was not sleep paralysis. I've had sleep paralysis numerous times. I've learned how to make it stop. I had already learned how to make it stop at that point, and it was not a dream either. I was just completely awake, just sitting in my chair, and with my laptop in front of me, and so I feel this presence moving toward my bedroom door, and I don't know what it was, but there was just this really scary feeling, and so I'm like waiting to see what's going to appear at my door, or like open my door, or if I might see something through the crack into the hallway. And right when I feel like there's something outside of my bedroom door, all of a sudden I start to feel and hear this vibration. It was kind of like a low bass noise that I would compare to almost like a generator kicking on, like kind of like a gasoline generator, but if it started off very slowly at first and then picked up gradually over time. And yeah, I see ERL Orb saying they had something similar recently. I've actually been compiling dozens and dozens and dozens of experiences like these, and it's a huge interest of mine that I can go into if we have time. But suffice it to say, I start to feel this vibration, which is also a noise. It starts off very slowly, so it's kind of like whoomp, 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 and it starts to get louder and louder and louder until it becomes deafeningly loud, like louder than a helicopter, louder certainly than a generator, so loud that it should have woken up the entire town that I'm in, basically, but it seemed to be localized to my head, or my body at least. And simultaneous to this happening, the vibration started in like the center of my body and then slowly spread throughout the rest of my limbs. And it was finally when it reached like this fever pitch to the point where it became painful, and it was paralyzing me as it happened. Like I was kind of struggling against it at first, and it felt like if you've ever been on one of those carnival rides, like the Gravitron, or one of the ones that spins really fast until it pins you up against the wall and you can barely move. You can sort of move if you really fight against the centrifugal force. That's what it felt like. So I'm like trying to fight against this force, and it was just pulling me back or pulling me out almost. It felt like I was maybe being pulled out of my body or something. And I could feel each individual molecule of my body independently vibrating is the only way that I can describe it. And so finally, this vibration reaches my head. It's absurdly loud. And I just remember my vision filling with like black static or something. And I lost consciousness. And then I woke up some amount of time later, at least a few hours, because it was broad daylight. It was 7:30. I remember that I woke up 7:30 in the morning, broad daylight. Now there was light coming through the blinds, and I was no longer in that armchair. Now I was laying in my bed with my arms crossed like this, just like staring up, laying on my back. I remember my bed cover was like very neatly laid on top of me, and I was laying in a position that I would never, ever, ever sleep in, because as I mentioned, I'd been dealing with a lot of chronic pain at that time. I had recently strained my shoulder, like this kind of muscle back here, and it bothered me for years, and it got to the point where I physically could not sleep on my back. I had to sleep on my left side. So I would never sleep like that. I would never sleep like this. And I just I sort of like faded back into consciousness. At that point, the terror was completely gone. I almost felt kind of elated or energized. And I just like jumped out of bed and I was like, what the hell just happened? So that's the story.
Wow. I've heard that vibration thing happening to a lot of experiencers. That's crazy. So let me kind of get this straight. So whenever you were hearing those noises, you were starting to kind of get that, like a buildup of fear is what it sounded like. And then it kind of started to coincide with that vibration. And then it almost sounds like it hypnotized you into sleep or something. I don't know. That's
I think it zapped me into unconsciousness is the way that I
yeah.
like to look at it. Whatever it was basically I could feel a presence in, like an L formation, like an L like this. My bedroom's here. There's the hallway. And then it goes that way towards the front door over here. I could hear something at the front door over here. I could sense it too somehow. And just, I guess you can always sense when somebody's in your house most of the time. I think we kind of had that sixth sense. And I just felt it somehow moving towards the door. And then right when it got here, we're like just about there, and I was waiting to see something, boom, this vibration kicks in.
That's crazy, man. So the fact that you woke up like a straight up vampire as well is even more creepy. That's crazy, man. So what happens after that? That's what started some of the experiences, I'm assuming.
Yeah, well, like I had mentioned, I'd had some sleep paralysis prior to that, sleep paralysis, but I had written them off. What that experience was, and why I say it was maybe the most transformative that I've had in my life, certainly up there, was it was the most in terms of intensity. It was beyond pretty much anything that I've ever experienced, and I've had a lot of profound experiences in my life. I'll just put it that way, whether it's through meditation or exploring the psychedelic realm, astral projection, if you want to get into that. I sort of got into the mind awake, body asleep protocols a few years later after all of this. But the reason it was so transformative was because all of a sudden, very rapidly, it was like, okay, I'm interested in this topic. Now it's being validated by some authority figures. Now I'm researching it intensely. And then all of a sudden, 2 weeks later, something happened. I didn't see any entities at all, but very clearly something incredibly strange happened. And it seemed to involve missing time. And I have no idea what happened during the interim at all. But it was just clear that something happened. And so that really flicked the switch in my brain to where I was like, maybe not all the way towards aliens are real, any sort of ontology like that. But I was like, okay, there's definitely some weird shit going on. And the timing was very strange as well.
Did you almost get the feeling though that this was some other phenomena outside of the whole, like you said, sleep paralysis? And did you maybe correlate a little of it to your interests whenever it initially happened? Like, did you maybe have the thought come across your mind, like, maybe this is because I'm getting into this?
Yes.
Or did that come after, like years after?
No, that came immediately. I immediately just thought like
Gotcha.
the timing was it was just too quick. All of a sudden, I'm interested in this topic, and then this happens. So I thought that it was one of two things, which basically amount to the same thing, that I had started paying attention to the phenomenon. I had been activated in some sense, and I now have the feeling that that openness of like at least being open to the possibility that these things could be real, or being open to having uh, contacts with them, is almost not necessarily, but can be a type of catalyst, if not a prerequisite, for having the experiences. So it's almost like they took notice of me because I took notice of that.
Right. Yeah, I understand that. And yeah, like I think we've talked in length about that before in spaces, Paul, about that kind of acknowledgement or like opening up, your perception a little bit more as far as that's concerned. I want to ask you about like, were there any like physical, like after the fact, did you like check over yourself? Was there any sort of like physical indicators of anything out of the ordinary that occurred with this for you?
No, there was nothing at that time other than, again, just the weird position and the fact that I had moved from the chair to the bed and all of that. I eventually did end up getting some physical effects from some other experience 3 years later, which some people might know me for, but not at that time.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. I've actually heard of a few individuals too who dreamwalk in this position. Like, so it's interesting that you mentioned that there was, and not sleepwalking, like, don't get it confused with sleepwalking, but walking in dreams. Like, it's a very specific thing. So when you said that, it kind of like ticked a bell for me that like people who dreamwalk usually sleep in this position to do that. But that's really interesting that that happened. So that happened, and like how did this experience kind of like how did it affect you, right? First and foremost, and how do you feel like it sent you down like a specific, did it send you down a specific road? You know, like what in general did it like kind of set you on a path for?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say it sent me down any specific road, but like I said, it certainly opened me up to the subject in general. I'm like, okay, there is some kind of there. I'm not sure whether it's more psychological or not. These days I have maybe a little bit more of a sophisticated perspective on that stuff, but it just opened me up. As far as like the direct results of that experience, I do wonder if it energetically changed me in some kind of way. Like it was this kicking the door in on my consciousness, allowing in all sorts of other energies or entities or phenomena to be experienced. Again, this is a huge topic of discussion in the field is the effect of experiences as well as trauma and things like that, and how it can not just open you up to things, but can cause a kind of lighthouse in the dark effect, as it's sometimes referred to, where other intelligences start to take notice of you. So I think both kind of happened to me. I think I became more available to whatever these phenomena represent, and I became much more interested and open to it myself. And I say that because it wasn't long after that where I started to have more experiences, which did seem to involve entities and things like that.
So this was around, you said 2017, 2018?
Yeah,
Is
this is
when this
February
happened?
2018.
So how far apart from that experience to the next one, when did that occur?
I can't remember offhand right now. Yeah, I can't remember offhand at the moment.
Was it like months or years
Just
or?
months. From
Oh,
that point on, I didn't go a full year without having some kind of strange experience, or usually multiple ones. So pretty much from 2018 until now, things have kind of cooled down recently, but up till now, I've had at least a few strange experiences every year. And I'll share one that I don't think I've talked about on podcast that much. I'll try to be really quick about it, but it was just really, really interesting where, so this happens to me. I become extremely interested in the topic. I get through my final semester at university, graduate. I had already planned to move to California at that point, Los Angeles. So I'm getting ready to do that. I end up flying across the country to LA with a friend of mine, and we were in LA with another friend. We had been spending a couple weeks together, basically apartment hunting and just hanging out, getting to know the place. And and I had brought up the topic. It was taking off in the news. I was interested in it, so we'd been talking about it throughout the days we had been there. And so then one day when I'm in LA, we're at a Mexican restaurant, and the three of us are sitting down at our table. We had not been talking about the topic at all that day, but we had in the days prior. And we were all very open to it, all three of us. And so we're sitting down at the table. Y'all might have heard this, but I'll share it. We were sitting down at the table. It was like sunset. I remember the World Cup was on the TV. It was 2018. There was a TV in the restaurant, multiples, showing the World Cup. And as we had made our orders and we were just waiting to pick up some food and just sitting there chatting when this man walks in the front door of this restaurant and makes a beeline for our table. There are a bunch of other people in this restaurant. He just went straight for us. He was well dressed. He did not seem crazy or homeless or anything like that. I remember he just seemed to be wearing, I think he was wearing black slacks and a white button-up shirt. And I recall that he was kind of darker skinned, maybe Middle Eastern descent, something like that, Indian perhaps, short hair, tall, skinny man. He looked, totally normal. And he came up to our table, he waved at us, and he didn't say a single word. In fact, throughout this entire experience that I'll try to run through very quickly, he didn't say a single word the entire time. And so he comes up, makes a beeline for us, waves at us, and motions like this for a pen and paper. And I was honestly being kind of crappy and I think trying to get rid of him. And I was just like, nope, sorry, I don't have a pen and paper, which I didn't. But I think that was what was going through my mind. I was like, who is this guy? And so he just smiles and nods. And then he's like, okay. And then he like raises his finger, goes like this, and then goes down on our table that we're sitting at and just traces out the letters UFO. And then that caught all of our attention. And we just looked at him and we were just kind of stunned for a minute. And I think I said something to the effect of, did you see a UFO? And he nods and smiles. And then he basically proceeded to go into this charades routine where he first mimicked firing a rifle. Like he had, and I asked him, were you in a war or something like that? And he smiled and nodded.
So this whole time he wasn't talking, he was just like gesturing,
just miming.
moving.
He didn't say a single word.
And why would he come up to you, right? Like just the irony of it all. That's so
it makes no sense. So yeah, so he mimes out. He had apparently been in a war. He actually did this kind of motion. He does this, and then he does this, like this, and then twirls his finger. And I was like, did you get abducted in the war? And he nods and smiles. And then he starts, I think I asked, what does the UFO look like? And he goes up to the TV playing the World Cup and points at that. And I was making assumptions, so I don't know quite if what I was suggesting was actually what he was trying to say. But I asked him, I was like, was the UFO circular? And because I was thinking of a soccer ball, I don't know. And he I think he nodded, or he might not have. But then he went to like different corners of this little side of the restaurant that we were in, and like touched each corner of the wall, which again could have meant multiple things. But in that moment, I was like, "Are you saying the UFO was like this big?" And I think he nodded. That's all that I recall in terms of the charades that he did. And then he just like waved goodbye and just walked out of the restaurant and didn't talk to anybody else. He didn't ask for anything at all. He just for some reason was drawn to us and wanted to tell us the story. And again, that took place in 2018. About, I would say, yeah, it was July of 2018. So 5 months after this vibration thing happened. And that might have been like just the next strange thing in general that occurred.
I'm wondering if he meant a football, because, you know, the Europeans call soccer football. So I'm wondering if that's what he meant.
Well, yeah, it was the World Cup. So soccer, football, it's a, spherical ball. I assumed circular, but now I don't know what he meant. Like, with him touching the sides of the restaurant, and nobody was paying attention to him either, strangely, nobody in the restaurant. I wonder if like maybe he was in the UFO and he was like trying to like find a way out or something. That's occurred to me since. I honestly don't know what he was trying to say, but I'm just retelling the experience to the best of my ability.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah. So this was a couple of months after that initial experience. So that's kind of one of the main things that stands out. And then do you keep having like these kind of, I don't want to like polarize your experiences, but sort of similar to that sleep paralysis type of experiences, or does it go like straight from 0 to 100 after that?
Yeah. I feel like it went from 0 to 100 immediately, but there are two kind of main events, I suppose, over the 7+ years that I've been researching this stuff and having experiences. So at that stage, I had learned to make sleep paralysis stop. I like very easily, instantly, like without even seeing anything. Maybe I'll catch a quick glimpse of something. I just learned to make it stop. And I was actually watching your podcast that you just did with James Ian Doley, and I recall him saying the same thing. It's pretty easy to break out of sleep paralysis once you learn how to do it, for me at least. And so, prior to that, I had some interesting sleep paralysis stuff that I don't need to go into detail for right now, I guess. But after that, I wouldn't say that any of my stuff was sleep paralysis, but was more so, and some people will say that it is, some kind of liminal state, some other state of consciousness.
It's a better word.
Yeah, it's a liminal state, meaning it's an in-between state between whatever brainwave state you're in at that moment when you're sleeping and wakefulness. The main two being the hypnopompic state after you wake up and the hypnagogic state before you go to sleep. In my case, it was pretty much always, I would say it was always the hypnopompic state. I would wake up usually from a very deep sleep and have various types of strange experiences. And I don't take any of those things at face value. I can describe the experiences and I can speculate about them, but I certainly don't take them at all literally.
That's a good grounded approach, especially with the, you know what I mean, the stigmatization that already exists. So it's good, even in your own experiences, right? Just to kind of stay level-headed. I think it's always good to kind of just be in the middle of the possibilities of what that could be, right? I mean, I don't know. I feel the same way about a lot of things myself with this topic. So I think that that's a very grounded approach to have. So what happens after that, though? Let's get to the big one here.
Yeah, sure. And again, I'll just say that I agree, and I consider myself the biggest skeptic of my own experiences. To this day, I'm willing to say that they could have been almost anything. I'm even willing to say that they could have been very elaborate dreams, but I ascribe an extremely low probability value to those possibilities. It's just, if you are being intellectually honest and have like epistemic humility, you have to take every single possibility into account. And I think it's also worth clarifying that at this time period, from 2018 until 2021, with the next thing that I'll go into, I was still extremely skeptical myself. And I had also just moved in with an old friend of mine into a room in Hollywood, and he was a massive skeptic. Like he didn't believe in any of this stuff. And so I was constantly second guessing myself and having him sort of laugh at me or second guess me. And that, I think, ultimately was kind of ended up being healthy for me, because it kept me grounded and kept me thinking in an honest way. But I just think it's important to underscore the fact that I did not really truly believe that there was anything non-human going on, or like very, just extremely anomalous, until around 2021. So yeah, from after that weird thing with the guy at the restaurant, I moved to LA. I did have some very, very interesting kind of, I'll say, liminal experiences, things that seemed like out of body experiences, where I felt myself spontaneously leave my body, float up through the ceiling, zoom through outer space. I encountered a mantis alien being during the first of these encounters. I think that was my first alien encounter, was with that. And it was very simple what happened. I floated up through my apartment building, up through the floors, into space, found myself in a dark room, heard these clicking noises, and then this big insect thing comes into my view. It was green, and I remember in my head saying hello, and then it said hello in this incredibly friendly voice that I could hear. and I compare it to like the voice of a salesman. But so I say hello, it says hello, and then I say, what am I doing here? And then it says, well, we saw that you were here, and so we thought that we would show you around. And I start to get kind of excited for a second. I'm like, oh, maybe I'm on a UFO or something. But then I kind of stopped on that word we, and I was like, we? I said, we? Are they here? And by they, I meant the Greys. For some reason, that was just what I assumed he meant. It was a male voice. And then he just said yes. And I remember kind of just looking down, and I saw two little Greys on either side of this mantis thing, kind of smirking at me, actually. And at that point, I could feel my heart start racing. I got filled up with fear, and I can feel the experience kind of destabilizing, is the way I'd put it. So that's a term that I like to use within the whole astral projection thing, stabilization, destabilization. It started to destabilize, and right as I'm fading out, I hear the mantis guy say, goodbye, Vidal, and I just plopped back into my body or my bed or whatever. So that was the quickest that I could share that experience. And I just shared as an example of the kind of stuff that happened to me between 2018 and 2021 when I got these physical markings.
So that was like more or less a astral experience. And in that, are you seeing this as some type of overlay, or is it like, how are you actually perceiving this
Good
when
question.
it's happening? Yeah.
That's a great question. So at this time, I knew nothing about the whole subculture of astral travel and people that believe that it's a thing. And I have to, again, underscore the fact that I use the term astral projection extremely loosely. People use that term in all sorts of ways to mean many different things, and I'm skeptical of all of them. And I just use it as a point of convenience. But so at that point, I knew nothing about this stuff. All I knew was that sometimes when I would be sleeping, I would start to feel these vibrations going throughout my body. And they were very gentle and like pleasurable vibrations. Nothing like this kind of painful thing that happened in 2018 that was deafeningly loud. Just very gentle vibrations. And none of this ever happened until after 2018. So I feel like whatever happened in 2018 kind of unlocked something. So I'd be sleeping, I'd feel these vibrations, and specifically I'd feel myself kind of being pulled out of my body is the best way I can describe it. But I would always fight it. I'd always be like, oh, this is sleep paralysis. I need to like wiggle and get out of bed and make it stop. And I would fight it. But then when this mantis experience that I described happened, it just happened to be one night where I was like, screw it. I'm going to see what happens if I don't fight it and just lean into it and let it take over me. And so I would call it getting pinged. Like I'd be getting pinged night after night, like something's knocking on the door of my brain or my mind. And finally I just opened the door and said hello, literally. And yeah, but to answer your specific question, experientially, it was not an overlay like some kind of lucid dreaming or astral projection can seem like. It was extremely visceral and literally felt like I was floating. I don't even know if it felt like I was leaving my body. It just felt like I was floating up into the air through the roof of my building. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So not necessarily outer body. Like you were conscious that you were astrally traveling, but you still, in a sense, felt your body physically actually coming out, like in a way, like, I don't know. That's, I mean, I get what you're saying, but that's like, I can't imagine actually going through that experience, I guess. But yeah, that's pretty wild.
Yeah, I knew that something was happening is all that I can put. I didn't really have a vocabulary for it. I didn't really believe in astral projection. I hadn't gotten this physical effect yet. So I was just skeptical about all of it. I just knew that something very strange happened, and it just kept getting me more and more interested. I ended up sharing that experience on Reddit. I had another, I shared that experience on Reddit and just started, engaging more with the topic and I started to realize how incredibly nuanced that it is, that there are these different hypotheses, that there's more nuts and bolts aspects to these things, that there's a psychosocial aspect, that there's a psychological aspect, possibly spiritual, astral, you name it. And it was just another step along the way, basically. So I didn't consider it to be astral projection necessarily, but now looking back, I look at it as a sort of either spontaneous event or something that was being done to me by an external intelligence, if that stuff is real, which I tend to think that it is now. But I can't say for sure exactly what happened with any of this stuff, really.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead, Christian.
No, I wanted to ask you, Paul, because so was it after this specific experience that you had noticed like physical, like any sort of like markings or anything like that came along with this particular experience, or when was this experience where you'd had some actual physical like leftovers, is what I'd call it?
So that happened in 2021, and it was the only real experience that I would say for sure left some kind of physical effect. Although it's actually, ironically, it was kind of a non-experience because I don't know. I have no memory of what caused it, so I can explain all of that though. Okay, so like I said, I had a few just strange experiences, things that seemed like out of body that I later would view to be maybe astral, whatever that means. Then in 2021, I established myself in LA. I was very happy. But then, as we all know, COVID hit in 2020. I was not laid off from my job, but I was like, I had a contract with them when I came back in 2021. But in the meantime, I was totally free and I was making good money off of unemployment. So I went back to New Jersey for several months to live at my mom's place again. I still had my apartment, but I left that to my roommate, and I was staying in New Jersey. My mother was sick at the time. I wanted to spend as much time with her as possible, and she has since passed away. So it was once again February, strangely. This was February of 2021. I was much more into the topic, much more open, but still kind of on the fence. And then here's what happens. During about a 2-week period from maybe late January through early February, I kept getting pinged or just kept having weird things happen. Like one night I would just get pinged. I would feel these strange vibrations. The next night I would wake up, this one night in particular, and I saw what was very clearly the outline of a small gray alien standing by my bed. It was only a silhouette. It was dark in my room, but I could very clearly see, darker than the darkness, just big bulbous head and skinny little body standing at the foot of my bed. And still very skeptical at this point. I'm like, okay, maybe the sleep paralysis is coming back. I don't know what's going on, but it was like almost every night something was happening. And so I see that silhouette. I'll share one other thing that happened. Again, I wake up, I'm feeling these vibrations, and during one of these experiences, I could see through my bedroom wall. And if you look into Earl Grey, the MUFON director for Southern California, who recently passed away, I actually shared this experience on X. If you want to look at my replies, he had a very similar thing where like a portal opened up in his wall and he could see into the distance. So I woke up in this kind of liminal state. I could see through my wall into the distance, and somewhere off in the sky was a triangular UFO, like a black triangle. And it kind of lit up like there was a bright light, and I saw a blue beam of some type go into my bedroom. And it was like it was scanning my bedroom like very rapidly, like scribbling almost. It was just scanning, and I was terrified. I remember just like closing my eyes, like just not wanting to see whatever was going on. I didn't want to see, even if there was an entity in my room, I just didn't want to see it. And So at this point, I'm just like, what the hell is going on? There was nothing in my life that, you know, like we were talking about earlier, that might have caused this. Like, there's just nothing unusual at all. Just going about my life. And so all these things happen. And then one night, about, I think it was 2 days, maybe 3 days after I saw the silhouette by my bed, I woke up in the morning from a completely dreamless sleep. And I highlight that because I am a very active dreamer. I keep a dream journal. I've kept a dream journal for 7 or 8 years now. And I am not exaggerating when I say that I remember at least one dream every single night, that not a single day goes by that I don't remember my dreams. It's incredibly rare, maybe a couple times a year, if that. So I wake up from a dreamless sleep and I instantly feel this pain in my left calf. And in the moment, I assumed that I had pulled a muscle in my sleep, that I had gotten some kind of Charlie horse or something like that. But the thought did occur to me that that would be kind of weird because, you know, that happens sometimes. And when it does, it always wakes me up because it's extremely painful. It's like you stretch your leg too far and you overextend it. And then you're like, and you wake up. And that didn't happen. What happened was that I woke up, and what it felt like was there was something had been done inside of the muscle of my left leg. And so I didn't think much of it. I went about my day, and then maybe 30 minutes later, I'm getting dressed, and I just happened to glance down. I wasn't even looking for it. I just noticed on the back of my left leg these 8 little puncture wounds. I probably should have sent those to you, Paul, before starting this conversation so that people can get a really good idea of that. If you want, I can quickly message that to you.
Yeah, send it on next.
Yeah, I think that it's actually really important to have that context. So that will take like 2 seconds.
Yeah, absolutely. Take your time. No worries. I love this story, man. It's great. I think a lot of people here in the chat have been loving it too. So take your time, man.
Cool. I really appreciate all the positive responses, by the way. Like, you guys are the best. I really appreciate all of it. And I appreciate you and Christian. I think you guys are doing a great job. So let me see real quick. Okay, here we go.
Okay. Yeah, it's intense stuff, you know? It's pretty hardcore.
Yeah, I mean, these topics are all extremely fraught with a lot of different things. And I don't know. It's sometimes it's hard to even talk about because there's just so much that I want to get into all at once. Sorry, this is like the one time that I'm having difficulty locating it. Just give me 2 seconds. Okay, here it is. I'm just trying to find the file location. Okay, I don't know why that wasn't coming up. There we go. All right. So I'm going to send you 2 pictures, maybe 3. Here's the main one, the most important one. You can zoom in on it yourself if you want. Paul, I just sent it to you on X. And then I'm going to send a zoomed in version just for the heck of it. And then I will send another picture from 6 months later where you can see how slow the healing process was. And you can also kind of get a better idea, I think, of what, I don't know, just what they actually look like. So share those as you please. While you're doing that, though, I guess I can just mention that if you guys are, I don't know, interested, I recently appeared in season 2 of Leslie Kane's documentary series called UFOs Investigating the Unknown. And if you watch episode 5, they do show a picture of those marks and they zoom in on them. They don't go into too much detail, but it's a really solid series, honestly, incredibly well produced. And it was an amazing time, you know, being there.
Yeah, I I had shared that clip earlier, and we'll probably put that in the description down there for everybody to take a look at. Let me get those pictures pulled up, and we should be good. Give me a second here. So, okay, while we're waiting for that though, so what happens after you're examining the puncture marks and so forth? I think you're muted, Paul. Go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, we can't hear you, brother.
Sorry. Yeah. So I noticed the marks, just happened to notice them, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's whatever that pain was, that has something to do with that. I instantly took a picture of it, and the first picture that I sent you is that picture that I took right after noticing them. And I'm just like, what the hell is this? And my mother was actually doing some work in the other room, and I just like went in there. I was like, what is this? Like, just showed these marks to her, and she was kind of dumbfounded. And it actually led to a really great dialogue that my mother and I had during the last few years of her life, where she revealed to me that she was an experiencer as well, that she had experiences with gray aliens, out of body experiences, near death experiences, all sorts of things, and that she had really not told anybody about it for her entire life. And so that was really amazing, and I'm kind of grateful, if only for that reason. I will also say that the markings, I can go into more detail about my feelings about them, but the big takeaway for me, what the big takeaway for me was that it felt like some kind of confirmation, whether it was purposely trying to confirm something to me, that like whatever intelligence may or may not have put it there. Again, I leave open a very low probability option that there's some incredibly natural explanation for this, but if it was an external source, I do wonder that it could have been left there purposely for me to notice in order to stop doubting myself, basically, stop gaslighting myself or allowing myself to be gaslit by other people. Of course, you could think that that's a form of confirmation bias, and that's totally fine. But I do wonder about that. It's also possible that it was just some byproduct of whatever kind of operation was done. And I'm also not saying what it was or who did it, because I have no memory whatsoever. All I have are these various events that happened before and after. So I'll just finally conclude by saying that the next day I woke up and again saw a gray alien standing by the front of my bed, but this time it was in the daylight. And so I got a decent look at it, but it was already in motion when I saw it. It seemed to be like surprised or something. And so it was at the foot of my bed and just kind of like moved somehow, leaving like a tracer behind it, just glided around my bed and disappeared. That was the next day after seeing that. So it really did feel confirmatory.
Yeah, that's incredible, Paul. You know what I mean? That's really, like, for me, that's compelling, like compelling testimony, especially coming from someone like you. You're a very well-grounded individual. Obviously, like you said, you leave that very low probability of this being, just whatever else it could be. I have a question about, like, so you had this happen to your calf. Have you had any like medical examinations since this in that area with a specific focus on saying, hey, something weird happened to my leg, like anything, MRIs, or anything at all, like metal detectors?
No, I have not. I did actually buy some neodymium, whatever it's called, neodymium magnets shortly after that, just to see if there's anything magnetized. So yeah, Paul, you brought the pictures up. You can flip back and forth between them if you want, just to give people the idea. So the first picture, the widest angle, gives you an idea of the scale. It was about, I'd say, 4 inches, 4.5, maybe 5 inches. I don't know, at least 4 inches. These 8 marks, they're pretty well spaced, not perfectly spaced in a row. To answer your question, Christian, no, I have not had anybody look at it medically. I've talked to medical people about it, though, just talk to them about it and showed them the pictures. And every single one that I've talked to agrees that it is not a scratch. It's not a healing scratch. That's the first one that people tend to go to. And I literally, after this happened, I spent months just Googling or finding any picture that I could, not just of people who've had anomalous markings, but just literally typing into Google, scratch, healing scratch, partially healed scratch. I've had, partially healed scratches where, the skin heals in such a way that leaves little gaps like that. This is not that. And I make that argument for a few reasons. If you go to the picture of when it's healed, the next one, Paul, you can clearly see, in my opinion, that there's no laceration in between whatever these things were. It was very clearly 8 individual things. And furthermore, there was no topical sensation on the skin whatsoever. There was no pain on the skin. There was no itching, nothing. Burning, nothing. The only sensation was inside of the muscle. I say about an inch or two inside of my muscle, and it felt identical to an intramuscular injection. If anybody's ever gotten an intramuscular injection at the doctor, a vaccine, anything, that's what it feels like. And it was not a radiating pain. It was the type of pain that you'd only really feel when you're taking a step, like walking or like flexing that muscle for some reason. So there's that. And then the pain itself lasted for about 2 weeks, which is unlike any pulled muscle that I've ever had. Wow. Certainly unlike any kind of scratch or bug bite, which I'll get to. And then the scars lasted for 2 years. That other picture was 6 months later, and it still was very fresh. So,
wow.
And as far as bug bites go, you can look it up. In early February of 2021, there was at least 3 feet of snow outside in my area, and there was nothing alive, or no bugs alive anywhere inside or outside in February of 2021, period. And it just doesn't line up with that. So that's my disclaimer, overly long. So yeah, I at this point I honestly hate talking about it, but for the sake of this podcast, of course I go into it. I'd love to talk about other things, maybe in a part 2, but at least before we end, I would definitely like to discuss how things went from there, between then and now, and what I'm interested in these days.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be a great way to kind of pull everything in together, especially with this specific experience. It's a lot, like Christian said earlier, but man, I just want to say before you kind of give us the overview, I just want to say thanks for sharing it. Like you said, I'm sure it doesn't feel fun to talk about it every time. I know even Christian would agree, and I probably would agree as well. In certain cases, it's kind of uncomfortable, not like in the sense where it's bringing up a ton of trauma. Maybe it might be that way for you, but for me personally, I feel like a little embarrassed maybe sometimes, just because the ontological nature of it all, you know what I mean? But I think it's good to see someone like you who's so articulate, and who's really, in my opinion, you're more of the more like just level-headed people in this community. So I got to give you kudos, man, where it's due. So keep doing it, man. Keep talking about it as much as you can. You know what I mean? It's helpful for the people that don't have a voice. So I just wanted to say that before we give our little overview here. So go ahead.
Thank you. No, I really appreciate that. And that's why I'm sharing this stuff. That's, I want people to realize that while a lot of this stuff might be psychological, psychosocial, spiritual, etc., sometimes it is just physical. And that goes for experiences or abductions or what have you, as well as the UFO phenomena. I'll also say that I'm not sure I've ever seen a UFO in the sky. I have seen some very strange things, but nothing which demonstrated the observables, as they say, which means just nothing that seemed that weird, or at least didn't do like any extreme acceleration or turning on a dime or even looked that like a UFO. So anyway, I really sympathize with skeptics, and I consider myself to be a very genuine skeptic, just not a debunker or a pseudo skeptic. So with that said, um, it's been I hope that talking about this stuff helps people, and at the very least for me, if I never shared those pictures with certain people, I would not have had some of like the most awesome experiences that I've ever had. You know, I've made some incredible connections just in the past 2.5, 3 years since I moved back to New Jersey, which I did in 2022. Um, yeah, I've just met some of the most amazing people. Like Whitley Strieber had me on his podcast last year. Leslie Kane obviously included me in her docu series. Through that series, I was fortunate to get to know some incredible PhD tenured professors. Like shout out to Dr. Kimberly Engels, who was recently at Archives of the Impossible. Incredible conference, by the way. Um, I could give a ton of shout outs. Randall Nickerson has been a great friend to me. He kind of introduced me to a lot of these people, and J. Christopher King. The Inquire Anomalous conference in New York City was the first ever live event of any type that I ever went to with this topic. And I'd never even been on social media either prior to that. And so it was really Inquire Anomalous where I guess I came out of my shell a little bit, and then, went on to UFO Twitter and got to know you fabulous people. So weird things can lead to good places, or even I think bad things can be made into a positive. So with that spiel out of the way, I'd like to thank a whole bunch of other people, but at the risk of belaboring the topic, after 2021, that was when I guess my flip occurred, to use Jeffrey Kripal, Dr. Jeffrey Kripal's terminology. I was like, okay, obviously something happened. I don't know what it is, but it was something physical. So even if I want to write off all of my other things as psychological events or dreams or whatever, liminal states, that was physical. And so, it was that, and it was the vibration thing, which I would argue was also physical because I was wide awake. I went from my chair to my bed, the positioning, all that. Those were the two real physical experiences that I think I've had. I just wish that I knew what they were, So, and that kind of segues into the last part. So after that, I was all over Reddit, became very active on Reddit in particular before I got into Twitter or anything. So I posted about this experience on Reddit. I also joined several Facebook groups and just started talking about this. Met a lot of people, got a lot of feedback, a lot of support, a lot of crappy people too, but mostly support. And started looking into different possibilities. A lot of people want to say it was an implant. Oh, you're part of the hybridization program. You should look into this, look into that. And after I started opening up all these possibilities, more and more stuff started happening. And I guess the main thing that a lot of people said, or one of the main things, was, oh, a lot of this sounds like astral projection. And at first that kind of turned me off, because I don't want to say like anything is just anything. Like, it is what it is. But I start looking into astral projection, whatever that term even means. And I start researching it more. And I'm like, okay, whatever this is, regardless of whether it has any empirical sort of verifiability in terms of like if you're actually leaving your body and floating around the 3D world and are able to verify things, or whether it's just more of a psychological exercise where you interact with your subconscious, whatever it is, I want to try to do it. And so I looked up different techniques and just, came across the whole mind awake, body asleep thing. And I didn't really follow any specific guides. I just kind of like incorporated that principle and tried doing it. And over time, very, very, very slowly, from like 21 to 22, I found myself able to reach this meditative state, you know, when I would wake up first thing in the morning. And then from there, I was able to get into the vibrational state, as people call it. And then I started to see things kind of like an overlay. And then before you know it, I start having very similar experiences to, for example, the praying mantis thing, where it genuinely felt like I would be floating up out of my body or whatever, and was able to explore something like this 3D world, you know. So that's where things really went from there. And you know, I could say more about that, but I guess where I'm going is that I started to try to achieve more of an intentional um, aspect to it, rather than just having these things happen to me. I wanted to be able to basically have more reciprocity, more of a reciprocal relationship with whatever was happening to me. I wanted to be able to control it or maybe induce it myself. And I had some success with that, but I also kept getting these pings for a long time. I would just have these spontaneous vibrations every once in a while. And I'm not going to go into all of those experiences, but upon leaning into them, I had a whole bunch of other really interesting kind of liminal experiences, and I continue to. I'll just share one that has nothing to do with aliens, but just to give you an example. Like, I'll again kind of wake up, feel these vibrations, and things will happen. And about 2 weeks after my mother passed away, I woke up into one of these things and saw a woman in a white robe just standing at the foot of my bed. She had white hair, white robe, and she was looking at me with this totally neutral expression, just completely neutral. And I was feeling these very intense vibrations, and she just looked me dead in the eyes and then just turned her head and drifted away. So that's just one of probably a dozen that I could share that were not intentional. And then if I wanted to go into the ones that I've intentionally induced, there's probably another dozen there too.
That's insane. Yeah, Paul, I think we're gonna have to do a part 2 on some of these experiences. I had no clue about that. I think I might have briefly heard you mention that in passing, but maybe in a space or something previously, but that's pretty crazy. Paul, do you have anything, kind of on the horizon for yourself, that any goals that you've been setting for yourself, or anything in particular?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Well, I'm hoping to be at Contact in the Desert this coming month. That should be fun, assuming I can make it, or should be fun in general. I recommend anybody that's interested in going to almost any of these conferences to do it. I truly think that the best part of these experiences, aside from generally enchanting my life and making it a lot more interesting, are the people that I've met. And I'm not like BSing or being trying to be cheesy or corny when I say that. Some of the best people that I've ever met in this field, or in general, are in this field, and getting to interact with them, especially on a continual basis from event to event, has been amazing. So I look forward to doing more of those. Probably a little bit less than I've been able to, since I'm working more now, but there's that. And as far as projects and such, it's, things have been in the beginning stages for a while, but the main thing that I've been compiling is an extremely long and diverse list of various types of vibrational experiences that people have in all types of situations, whether it is simply through meditation or during a psychedelic experience. Those are pretty common. Or whether it's during a UFO sighting. Again, James Ian Doley just described some of his sightings that involved vibrations, or whether it's astral projection, quote unquote. All of these things definitely have a common factor involving frequency and vibration. And what I'm interested in is maybe trying to define our language a little bit better when people talk about these things, because we constantly hear we have to raise our vibration, we have to increase our frequency. And I think sometimes we run a risk of overgeneralizing and not just not being curious or specific enough into what we're actually talking about. So if through compiling, a bunch of data and then correlating it and cataloging it, if I can somehow contribute some knowledge and maybe get to work with some actual either scientists or psychologists or people that just have theories as to the nature of these phenomena, some of which I've already been in contact with, I think that would be really useful for the community at large.
Well, I would be interested to see where that goes. So I hope you're able to maybe get on to that path as soon as possible. Christian, do you got any words for Paul before we close out tonight?
I just want to thank you, brother, for coming up here and doing this. You know what I mean? I know it's not easy, like Paul was saying, and life gets busy, but these voices and these experiences, they're needed, right, for other people, because it almost sometimes gives other people permission to talk about it for themselves. So I appreciate you, brother. Thank you for coming on here. And thank you again, Paul, for hosting the Portal Room.
All right. Thank you guys one more time. I'll say it again. I think you're doing really great work here. I think the two of you have always had fantastic chemistry, and I've really been enjoying going through my backlog recently of all of your episodes. And I hope you keep it going, because I think it's only going to get better and better from here. And I would love to come back for a part 2.
Oh, I don't know what to say. I'm blushing. I appreciate it, man. We had our Paul multiverse converge today. Finally. Amazing.
It happened again. Proof that you've seen us in the same place. We're not the same person. Not that was ever
and we're oddly wearing like similar outfits. We got the button up.
That's weird.
And the
my God.
On. Full on effect, man. I love it.
All right,
Paul. Well, thanks again so much for coming through tonight, and everybody in the chat, thanks for supporting the Portal Room. Everybody, have a good night. Peace.